welcome to episode 73 of The Place of Sound. I'm your host, Natalie Hall. Summer is now over and school is officially back in session. Now, in the next coming months, we will be hearing new work produced in Vincent Andrusani's fourth-year course, COMS 4501 Digital Media Production. But as a new group of students enters Vincent's class, we have a few more weeks of freestyled episodes. In this episode, you will be hearing sounds and voices from Pico Azores. And there's going to be more on that in a minute, but first, a quick word about Ultra Red. In 2024, Ultra Red celebrated their 30th anniversary. Ultra Red is a collective of sound artists and political organizers. They have worked in both the art and activist world on needle exchange, AIDS activism, tenants' rights, and more. This July, they released the first volume of Ultra Red, a journal of militant sound inquiry, investigating movement-based listening practices that take the forms of militant inquiry and political education. This project was completely self-funded for 3 years. Now, Ultra Red is raising $10,000 to support this work and fund the next volume of this journal. If you want to support this work and group of talented artists, activists, and educators, you can find the link to the GoFundMe on our Instagram at The Place of Sound. And if you just want to learn more, you can follow them on Facebook at Ultra Red Collective. Or listen to episode 71 of The Place of Sound, where I speak with co-founder Don Ryan. Thanks for listening. Pico, one of 9 volcanic islands off the coast of Portugal. The population can't be more than 15,000. The whole island is anchored by this huge volcano that at one point long ago erupted and replaced all the sand on the beaches with this dark, hot volcanic rock. Home of cows and fish and cheese. It is also where my mother was born. Okay, well, technically she was born on the neighboring island of Faial. Everybody says the best thing about Faial is the view of Pico anyways, so I'm gonna count it. Whenever we can go back to Pico, we do. But the tie to the place is greater than just lineage or family obligation. And I've always felt that it has something to do with the water. Nowadays, Pico generates most of their economy from tourism and wine exports, but Pico has always been a whaling town. My great-grandfather was a shipbuilder for whalers, and my avô, his son, would help him work on the ships since he was a boy. My mom tells me stories of how the locals would have to plan their swimming schedule around whaling expeditions, because if you swam too close to a time a whale would be dragged in, the water would still be bloody and slick. So there has always been this tradition that tied the people of Pico close to the water. They reaped its benefits and respected it hand over fist. While whaling no longer occurs in Pico, this tie to the water persists. In a small way, the people of Pico continue the tradition of whaling by spearfishing, for instance. This summer, when I visited, It was my mission to finally go spearfishing. It was something my sister got to do when we visited, and she was 13 and I was about 7. And I was always really jealous that she got to do that. But this summer, mission accomplished. As all things are there, it happened very spontaneously. Enough so that I climbed into a wetsuit that was not my own and put on size too big flippers and basically was plopped in the water after a very brief tutorial from my cousins. My mom tasked George Madruga, experienced spearfisher and her first ever boyfriend, to look out for me in the water. George has lineage in Pico. Like many, his father was a whaler, and spearfishing is something he always did with his father and his brother. After we went spearfishing together, he talked to me about how it taught him exactly why you need to respect the water.
In 1978, I'm 15 years old, and it was the local boys that would talk about it. And it became kind of a competition thing amongst teens almost. And I just wanted to go out and be able to prove myself, and I fell in love immediately with it. There's something about being in the ocean and just seeing fish in their natural habitat, and it's very mentally liberating, if you will. There's a freedom to it that never gets old for me. If you're going after parrotfish, or veixe in Portuguese, they'll watch you until they're distracted by the food off the rock, and at that point you kind of, if you dive at that moment, you have the chance of catching one, but they are very wily. If they're in open water, they'll just maintain enough distance away from you that it's frustrating. No matter how fast you go, they're just ahead of you the whole time, and it's just a matter of trying to catch one around a rock. If you see them go dive down, if you can make your way around a rock where there's no visual cue, you might be able to catch them on the other side of that. And it's just that thrill of the hunt and the challenge of it that's so much fun. And even if I don't catch one, it's always a fun experience to begin with. Yeah, it's a spear that goes in the butt of the gun itself, and it's a trigger mechanism. So until the trigger is pulled, it won't release. And then you have rubber bands that you pull back onto the notches on the spear, and you have to put the butt of the gun on your chest or on your hip and use both hands to pull it back towards the notch on the spear until it sticks, and then you pull it again to the next notch for extra power, and you're ready to go. We broke some rules. This is 1978. I'm 15. My brother's 18 years old, and we were spearfishing off the coast of Manhinha at the point of the island, where we had one gun between the two of us. And we agreed that it was 10 shots each, and we would count each other's shots, so that, because it was very competitive between siblings. And he would, and after 10, you'd hand the gun over to the next guy. So when I had the gun, my brother, who was larger and had a better lung capacity, would dive deep to go into caves where you could find cavache, which is a shovel-nosed crab, it's called, which is like a lobster without the claws, if you will. And it just so happened that I had the gun. My dad, who was in a small rowboat on the surface. I'll backtrack a little bit. The first mistake that we made was my dad wanted to know where we were in the water. So we had these aluminum buoys that they use here all the time attached to our waist. And the length of the rope was longer than the depth of the water. So even if we were on the bottom, my dad knew exactly where we were. That was mistake number 1. You never tie anything to your body. Mistake number 2 is never dive without a knife. And we didn't have those with us either. My dad had called us in because of jellyfish that were starting to move into the area. I came onto the boat. I sat up on the edge of the boat and pulled my mask up onto my forehead. And my brother dove at that moment, just one last dive to kind of see what he could find. It just so happened he dove about 40 feet, and it was the mother lode. He came across a cave that was teeming with these things, and he put 2 on his chest and 2 on top of that, just right on his chest, just right up on his chest, and then 2 more. So he was trying to carry 4 of them together. And he then, at one point, after a few minutes, his buoy disappears and we can't see it. And my dad starts freaking out. And I put my mask on my face and I dive. What had happened was he had dove into a cave that had a rocky pillar just outside of it. and came out the other side of this rocky pillar, so the rope got stuck underneath. He didn't have the breath to dive down again to dislodge it, so he kept pushing up his flippers, which brought the buoy under the surface of the water. So when I approached my brother in about 15, 20 feet of water, he was gray and unconscious right next to the buoy, and he was lifeless there. And I dove past him, and it was almost beyond my lung capacity. But I got down there, and I'm pulling with all my force to get that rope dislodged from the rock. And finally it came up, and the buoy jumped out of the water. My brother slowly floated up.
Eu fui à terra do Bravo.
My dad screamed like he was looking at his dead son. I never wanted to hear those sounds emitted from him again, and which we never did. What had saved his life was that he didn't inhale water. Most people that are just about to drown will take a last breath, and that breath of salt water in your lungs will kill you. And he didn't do that. He just passed out due to lack of oxygen. But his jaw was clamped on his snorkel. My dad's trying to rip the snorkel out of his clenched jaw, which he did. And then I gave him very rudimentary mouth-to-mouth, at which point he sputtered up and he came to, and thankfully he had saved his life. When he describes it, he came to peace with his own death, actually, is what he says. And he was just watching the light rays come down upon him, and he found peace, actually, he said, during that process. And he had tried to cut the rope with the serrated edge shell of the kavak. And last thing he did was squeeze his hands to the point that he had cut his hands on the shell of the fish. We came back to the port. I had to go behind a boathouse and cry my eyes out. I didn't want my dad to see that, which, he would have totally understood. And by the time we got back to Pontas Negras, a half hour later, word had got back to them. We got out of the car. They wanted to call me hero. I didn't want to hear it. And I still don't. It was a very traumatic experience. But we wanted to go back to the ocean that next day because it was literally one of those gold mine fishing holes. And my dad, who's a man of the ocean and a whaler, we had 2 more weeks of vacation, and he never stepped anywhere close to the ocean in that time that we were there. And my brother and I never spoke about it for 30 years, up until not too long ago. Actually, my dad initiated. We were at my dad's place, and we started talking about fishing here. He turned to my brother and said, "You remember what happened at Manhinha?" And he looked at me and he goes, "Yeah, he saved my life." And it was the first time we'd ever spoken of it. He ever acknowledged it in any way, and it kind of was closure for all of us. And his own kids had never heard this story up until shortly after that, and we're talking 8 to 10 years ago maximum. So yeah, it was something that he obviously had internalized and had looked at him quite dramatically as well. And because that night he had nightmares that he woke up screaming and woke me up as well, and I was always fearful for him at the time. But yeah, that was a memory that neither one of us will ever forget.
Bravo meu bem, para ver sempre aprecia. Cada vez fiquei mais manso, cada vez fiquei mais manso. Bravo meu bem, para a tua companhia. Bravo meu bem, para a tua companhia.
I look at my nephew and my nieces and my great nephews and nieces, and I think, they might not be around. Had I not been lucky enough to put my mask on and find him there, I would have lost my brother at 18 years of age. And my mom had a stillborn baby in 1960, who's actually buried in Sant Antonio Cemetery, right where you guys are staying. And I would have been an only at the age of 15. So I do think about it, not super often, but it comes to my mind all the time. And it's still a topic that he and I don't openly speak about, but I think that day might still come at some point. The ocean is humbling. The ocean rules. You listen to it, you abide by it, and it's an honor just to be in it at any time. But you never mistake the power and how unforgiving it is. Nature doesn't care whether you live or die necessarily, and there's plenty of things in there that will take you out if you're not careful. And that's part of the reason I love spearfishing and snorkeling in general. I'm in a place of awareness and safety, and that headspace takes every other thought out of my head, any other concerns, anything about the world, about family. So it's my little aquatic therapy, if you will. Every time I go into the ocean, I have a profound humility and respect for it.
The day George and I went spearfishing, I didn't catch anything, but I'm glad to know that even with a spear gun by my side, the ocean will always have the upper hand. I want to thank my cousins, Simone, Joyce, and Gustavo for going spearfishing with me, to George for being my guide, and to the water for all it does for us.
Fala gravar.
Já não sei.
Pico é desprezado. 1, 2, 3. O pico é
desprezado por não ter terra e arado, é a ilha mais bonita. Ali toda a gente alegre, a gente antiga, cada balha chama Rita. Ai, enganei-me.
Tu enganaste. 1, 2, 3. O pico
é desprezado por não ter terra e arado, e é a ilha mais bonita.
O seu cantar é alegre,
toda a gente ali escreve, canta e baila, chama Rita.
Before I sign off, a couple quick notes. A reminder that what we've listened to here on this show is only a fraction of the work produced in association with this project. And if you're interested in checking out more, have a look at theplaceofsound.ca, where you can see writings and photos that go along with the audio work. You can also stay up to date by following us on Instagram at theplaceofsound. Keep your ear out for upcoming episodes of the show, which air on CKCU Radio every other Monday night at 6:30 p.m. and are available wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for tuning in, and happy listening. we end off, I just wanted to play a little bit of the conversation me and Don Ryan had. If it interests you, know there is way more we talk about. He's a super interesting person, and you can find that conversation anywhere you get your podcasts or visit our website at the Place of Sound. I want to talk about where Ultra Red is now, 30 years later. What does it look like?
Well, for one thing, we're older. The kind of the corporeal reality is that we're older, and so certain things that we used to do, we just can't do that well anymore. So, like, not to get too personal, but for instance, I'm deaf in one ear. So trying to work with recordings and audio where you're absolutely profoundly interested in the spatialization of sound, like that's so much of the experience of sound is its spatialization. But when you're monophonic, you only hear it in one ear, it's kind of, you don't have that anymore. So, some of these things are just like basic reality. But the obsessions that we've had have not gone away. They've remained constant. And while, yes, people, a lot of folks might have an association of ultra red with, experimental music or, even like house music or techno or stuff like that. Our position has always been this other way, is like how this is politically useful. At some point, the production of albums and the production of commercial music gets in the way of being able to have a conversation about the politics, because the album can largely only serve as a representation of the politics and not the actual politics. And while a representation of politics is important and necessary, that's just not where we come from, because we all have lifelong commitments to political struggles, as opposed to a kind of like, the artist, look, here's the artist going out with the poor people kind of thing. That's never been really interesting to us. So because of all that, like as we've gotten older, we've kind of asked ourselves, what are the things that we've learned that might be useful to communicate? I mean, it's a classic sort of old person question. What have I learned and what do I want to pass on? That kind of thing. And so then what's the form for that? Is the form for that more albums? Is the form for that a tour of performances? What's the form for that? And we had a discussion, and we felt, given who we are and where we are and how we're spread across the globe, that the form would be a journal. So we've done this thing that we have done regularly where we've kind of changed what we do. So now we're in the process of producing a journal. So the first issue should come out later this summer. And we're working with a Finnish publisher, Rob Press. They're really awesome people. Yeah, the journal is called Ultra Red, and then it's a journal of militant sound inquiry. And so for us, this is a way to sort of acknowledge where we come from, but also to situate where we come from within the traditions and the problematics of popular education. We want to talk to people who have that kind of history as well, who have had an influence or impact on us and on the way we do politics. That's the project right now, is this journal. And I'm very excited to share it with people.
And just to finish us off, here's a couple of projects done by Ultra Red throughout the years. I hope it gets you in the mood to listen. Have a great Monday night.
Show, starring Lawrence Russell with Terry Temple.
Hello, I'm Terry Temlitz. You may know me from such albums as Means from an End or Love Bomb, or simply think of me as that queer transgendered producer of electroacoustic music. Remember that piano solo album of Kraftwerk songs? That was mine. In May of 2001, I was brought to lecture and perform in Belgium by Constant, an organization employing critical works, interventions, texts, and new media to promote awareness around such issues as feminism, gender, and author rights. It was there that I first met the director of Constant, Lawrence Russell, one of Belgium's first and most prominent cyberfeminists. Oh, don't bother Googling her name. You won't find anything. You see, Lawrence spent the bulk of her career operating anonymously whenever possible, as a critical rejection of systems of authorship which, socially and legally, are inseparable from the troubles of patriarchy. At the same time, Lawrence is skeptical of notions of active invisibility, knowing that there is a fine line between those invisibilities we choose and those which are imposed upon us. In September 2004, Lawrence and I met again in Spain, where we were both giving discussions about gender issues at Arteleku Art Center. It was then and there that we began planning a collaboration that would combine our various approaches towards identity construction and murder.
That was a little easier.
Between the death of her invisibility, a feminist assassination.
Your birthday? 8/8/67.
You got more people in your household?
Nope.
They know of, you know, and how many of them didn't they count, you know, in their little survey, you know. Says something for the cost.